This video is a follow-up to my previous Payday 3 video, in which I was not the biggest fan of the game. I got a lot of comments saying that, even though it was rough around the edges, it just needed some more time to be good, just like Payday 2 was. Even though I argued in the video that releasing now and gradually becoming better, while incredibly common nowadays, is not a good idea. Especially for a company that needs the income to survive. Also, I got a lot of comments talking about how I had no faith in starbreeze, and I didn't want the game to succeed. Maybe it wasn't obvious, but I really did want Payday 3 to be good. Payday 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, despite how rough it is and how it's literally built on a car game engine. That being said, I didn't let my love for the game outweigh my judgment. I try not to be a mindless drone and actually judge the game on its merits and downsides, of which I thought there were more of. The only time I mindlessly follow a creation is for Fujimoto, and we all know how that turned out. But whatever, people usually don't watch the full arguments and only comment based on half of it anyway. So time inevitably passed and I wanted to see, is Payday 3 finally good? Let's go over everything that has actually changed since I first played the game, which, to be fair, is quite a bit. The big thing was a series of changes called Operation Medic Bag, where they basically admitted that, hey, we know some things suck right now, but we are working on them. Which is pretty good all things considered. First of all, they brought back Cook-Off from Payday 2. Obviously, since Bane is being Israel's favorite soldier, we're left with Shade as our informant, who somehow also messes up the ingredients. But all things considered, it's fun to be back with the improved shooting of Payday 3. That being said, they inexplicably made it limited to 19 bags, so it's not infinite like the first one. One of my fondest moments of Payday 2 was grinding out Cook-Off, and I starkly remember my friend adding muriatic acid instead of hydrogen chloride 3 hours into a run, even though we had the mod on explicitly telling him which one to add. This change is part of a weird push I've noticed they've been trying to do with Payday 3, which is where they want to strictly control the currency market. In Payday 2, you could essentially get all the money you want, and even if you cheated it in, all you would get is a slap on the wrist and a mark on your account. With Payday 3 though, it seems like they don't want you to have too much money at any given moment. In my opinion, for a PvE game like Payday 3, I feel like a person being ahead of someone else doesn't really matter, even if they cheated it in, aside from leaderboards and everything like that. And it also does majorly affect something else as well, which is offline mode. Yeah, they just fully axed offline mode despite essentially promising it earlier. They say it's because they wanted to allocate the resources into the overall experience, but I personally believe it's because they don't want to deal with cheaters hacking in money offline and then validating server side, something that was easily done in Payday 2. Again, I feel like this is just a very silly thing to do and just adds another game into the pile of games that will be completely unplayable once the game company shuts down, which is looking more and more inevitable for starbreeze. Hey, at least they have peer-to-peer now. Cool, I guess? I feel like for a PvE game like Payday 3, this change really doesn't matter that much. And I also haven't noticed the queuing going any faster either. Moving on, another huge change they made was the overhaul to the skill system, where they completely axed edge, grit, and rush mechanics in favor of a traditional perk tree similar to Payday 2. This was a very welcome change, as the old, new system somehow felt both linear and complex, in that they would just give number boosts for very specific actions, which in my opinion is the lamest form of progression. With the new trees, they offer a lot more potential for creativity and build making. Similarly, they also made a revamp to the armor system. Essentially, you can choose what types of shields you have in each chunk, with each one offering different advantages, ranging from the old Payday 2 shield system that recharges, to the newer shields that have less delay but can get permanent damage. To be honest, maybe I just never experimented with my builds, but I felt like there was never a reason to not use the Impact shield, which was the Payday 2 one that always recharged. Yeah, sure, it has a longer delay, but in Payday, most of the time you're taking cover to take a breather anyways. Again, I personally didn't experiment with the other ones that much, but it really seems that the old shield just works better. And that's actually something I noticed with a lot of the updates in Payday 3, where so many changes just go back to what worked in Payday 2. To be fair, that does address a lot of the complaints I had in the first video, where I felt like they just changed things for the sake of changing things, rather than changing them for the sake of improvement. Another big update they made was to the overkill weapons, which now have progression called overskill. These add a bunch of bonuses, like making them actually good, although you do have to use them a lot to get to that point. It's a pretty neat idea and adds some really cool effects to the weapons, but in practice, it It really is just use the thing more to make it good. It kind of forces you to stick with one overkill weapon for the entirety of your playthrough, because if you try and experiment with different ones, you essentially shoot yourself in the foot by using an inferior overkill weapon. So, disregard pretty much everything I just said in the last minute. I was just editing this video when I saw this announcement on Steam. Turns out, they're planning on reworking Overskill to have variety and choice within the weapons, and not just a linear progression. Good job, Starbreeze. Speaking of overkill weapons, the situation got so dire that they had to press the emergency jacket button. And so many idiots fell for it and gave them money. It was me, I was the idiot. He's just as handsome as ever, and he has several more voice banks to boot.
You cannot hide from the Supreme One!
The weapon is kind of lame since it's just a preset for an existing weapon rather than being a weapon of its own, which means you can't customize it. But the overkill weapon more than makes up for it. And you also get the sociopath fear effect on higher overskills, so it's kind of like a blast from the past. Finally, there's the new enemy type, which is the techie or drone operator. To be honest, these guys are pretty neat. They offer variety in that you have to seek them out to stop the onslaught of drones rather than just being bullet sponges. And the drones are actually annoying enough to incentivize that. Also, there's the best edition they made of all time. Fat Cops. Yes, this was an actual highlight they added to their release notes. They take more bullets than normal cops, and have broken models. How are you not playing this game right now? Another thing I wanted to do with this video is look and compare how Payday 2 was faring 3 years in. Surely I was the wrong one, with all of these comments talking about how Payday 2 needed some more time to cook. For context, Payday 2 also launched to mixed reception, since it had pretty rough graphics even for the time, and barely any content in heists and weapons. Over time, it grew into the massive success that it is now, but I really don't think that's what's happening in this case. Let's go rapid fire over everything Payday 2 added in 3 years, starting with heists. In the first 3 years, they added Armored Transport Heist, Go Bank Heist, the Hotline Miami Heist, Big Bank, Hoxton Breakout, the Diamond Heist, the Bomb Heist, Hoxton's Revenge, Golden Grin, and 2 of my favorite heists of all time, Shadow Raid and Car Shop. Overall, they added around 11 heists. In comparison, Payday 3 added Syntax Error, Boys in Blue, Houston Breakout, Fear and Greed, Party Powder, Delivery Charge, and Shopping Spree. So 7 in total. In terms of weapons, Payday 2 added Gauge Weapon Packs 1 and 2, Gauge Shotguns, Gauge Assault, Gauge Historical, Gauge Chivalry, and Gauge Courier Weapon Packs. They also added Butcher's Barbecue and Western Packs. Given an average of around 3 weapons per pack, that's around 27 weapons added. Also, a lot of the weapons they added were really unique, in that they weren't just different rifles with different stats. They were adding things like bows, flamethrowers, Dragon's Breath rounds. They gave actual reasons to buy the DLCs, rather than just giving you a different flavor of rifle. In Payday 3, they added the Syntax Error Pack, the Boys in Blue Pack, the Houston Breakout Pack, and the Fear and Greed Weapon Packs, amounting to around 12 weapons. These weapons are more on the other side, where they're essentially just different flavors of rifles or shotguns, with different stats, rather than being anything really unique. Now, everything I just talked about was pretty much related to DLCs, and some may say judging a game's quality based on their amount of content isn't a really good measure. You know what? That's fair enough. So I'll go over the other stuff that they changed about the game to keep it alive. First and foremost, they added perk decks, which completely revolutionized how the game was played. I think Payday 3 going back to skill trees was a great step in this regard, but at that point, why not just add the perk decks as well? It would be a great opportunity to balance some of the older perk decks that really no one uses in higher difficulties. Another major thing they added and then reworked was Infamy, which essentially provided a prestige system for infinite replayability. Sure, the rewards were pretty primitive and lackluster, but they actually gave a reason to continue playing the game once you've unlocked everything. In Payday 3, they sort of have something similar with Renown, but rather than resetting your character so you can experience coming from the ground again, it's just more rewards for leveling up, which is infinitely less exciting, especially since it's just mass patterns. Payday 2 also added a new difficulty in the form of Death Wish. To be fair, I don't think Payday 3 needs a new difficulty just yet, as Overkill does its job just fine for difficult content. Finally, and most absurdly of all, Payday 2 added actual numbers to the weapon stats rather than arbitrary bars. A technology so advanced and foreign that Starbreeze cannot replicate it for Payday 3, 13 years later. Everything I just discussed were the major content drops for Payday 2, not even counting the smaller drops like the Butcher mod drops or the animation updates. Anecdotally, I think this is around the time the game started getting really good and getting mainstream appeal, since I distinctly remember playing the demo bank job for hours on end on my PS3. Overall, I feel like Payday 3 is a sequel to Payday the Heist, rather than a sequel to Payday 2. The combat and story is a lot more grounded, and it really focuses on that heist aspect. While that may be the case, it's for certain that this was the wrong approach. Payday 2 was massively successful for a reason, and while Payday the Heist might have had its fans that appreciated the refocused direction of Payday 3, it's undeniable that this led to many players, including me, being turned away by the massive shift in tone. I mean, just look at the player count of Payday 2 and Payday 3. I don't think there's ever been a sequel that's just been completely overshadowed in terms of player count like this. I feel like the design philosophy of Payday the Heist, while new and novel at the time, is something that's just completely oversaturated in this day and age. Payday really needed something other than heist to set it apart, and I think Payday 2 being as wacky as it was that something. While they are making good steps like revamping the skill system, I fear it may be too late, as most of the recognizable team is leaving for greener pastures, including Almir, who was essentially the face of Payday. At the end of the day, I did play with friends this time around, and had way more fun, but we really couldn't stop ourselves from comparing it to Payday 2, and how much more fun we would have just playing Payday 2. That's actually why I have a lot of hope for Den of Wolves. I feel like that game will be able to express a lot more unique concepts, given that they aren't tied to actual grounded heists. And while I have the highest hopes for Starbreeze and want them to make Payday 3 as good as possible, they're handing off their IP to a cheap meta VR game. The clock is ticking for them.